Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. The Ukraine War news update for the 13th of September 2023, second part of the news update. I've actually chopped off my frontline update part because it was a 46-minute long video, and so I'm just going to do my frontline update as a separate video. There's just a lot of geopolitical stuff. There's some stuff to add to what I've just been talking about, and it just went on for way too long. Sorry, not sorry. You'll see all the content, just in a different order. I've just done part one where I talked a lot and my breaking news update about what took place in Sevastopol. I just want to add a little bit on that I forgot to mention previously. A couple of points. One, someone actually talked already in the thread to the breaking news update that why can't they use Novorossiysk, this port? So I was talking about the importance of Sevastopol, and he was like, well, haven't they got other ports in the Black Sea? And I do mention this a bit in my first news piece that you wouldn't have seen yet. But the problem with this other port, Novorossiysk, is that it is shallower. It's already a commercial port. So to turn that into a naval, well, it can't be like necessarily a deep sea port. In other words, they can't moor the ships in the port. You can see it's a lot smaller, and they have to moor their ships out here, which is really not very convenient, and so on and so forth. Whereas for Sevastopol, you have a much larger port where it's much more protected. I mean, this is a classic sort of naval port. But it's very difficult to get in. It's why, like, unmanned sea drones getting in there is a lot more difficult. And you can moor all your boats all along here. And importantly, you've got things like dry docks. So, as Artois says here, sure, Russia can move the Black Sea fleet to Novorossiysk, but without dry docks and other dedicated maintenance facilities, sustainment becomes problematic very quickly. Now we know Storm Shadow can easily target Sevastopol. Russian naval defeats against a nation with no navy will accelerate. Case in point says this is Granger going back. So this was a reduced Novorossiysk naval base modernization plan after Crimea was annexed. Due to the Russian Navy having their facilities already in Sevastopol, they never added a dry dock or a maintenance facility in the newly established base. In other words, as far as I understand it, there were plans afoot to update this base, but then when they annexed Crimea, they didn't need to because they had Sevastopol. They didn't put dry docks and maintenance facilities there, which meant that it's all in Sevastopol. Now, if you can hit this with cruise missiles, then, you know, that's a real problem because this becomes functionally impotent, as I've said before, and you can't rely on other ports in the Black Sea because they don't do the same job that Sevastopol does. Now, Sevastopol. So the other thing about it that I forgot to mention is the very important point that just this week, the Ukrainians took control of 2 gas rigs in the Black Sea, right, just to the west of Sevastopol. And suddenly, within a week, Sevastopol is hit. There will be radar installations, I imagine, put on these rigs, and possibly, you know, jamming and all sorts of stuff going on that would no doubt help to attack Sevastopol. But also these are Scalp or Storm Shadow missiles fired from Ukrainian airframes. Now, realistically, you know, they are going to be released probably somewhere in this region, right? And in order to do that, they need to fly possibly over the Western Black Sea. In other words, without the activities of the Ukrainians at these gas rigs out in the Black Sea, I don't think they would have been able to hit Sevastopol. I think they probably got air defense systems put on here to protect their airframes, so the airframes can fly down here and then release their cruise missiles to hit Sevastopol. So you need to put all these things together. I failed to mention the oil rigs. I meant to, but just right. We're going to move on to military aid now. Not a great deal to report. British training of Ukrainian troops has reduced after noise complaints. I think this might be in Kent. London has to cut a Ukrainian military training program due to noise complaints, according to the Times. Newspaper writes Leeds City Council received complaints from local residents demanding the end To the constant explosions and smoke, the Ministry of Defence listened to the request and agreed to limit the noise and reduce the number of exercises by 30%. So, unfortunately for the Ukrainians, that has come about. I wonder whether they'll move training to elsewhere in the UK then. This is massive. Denmark has allocated a military aid package to Ukraine worth 5.8 billion Danish kroner. That's $830 million. Now, for Denmark, that is huge. Danish Defence Minister Troels Lund Poulsen says the new package will include tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, tank ammunition, and anti-aircraft guns. I'd love to know the finer details of this package. DKK, so Danish kroner, 4.3 billion Danish kroner will be spent by the end of 2023. Another 1.4 billion will be spent in 2024 and 52 million in 2025. So it's not just about giving it everything now, but a kind of a structured assistance to Ukraine over time. That again gives this message to Putin that, hey, we're in this for the long haul. Then there is this. So after saying 9 months or more for most of the last year, the Biden administration starts to admit the truth that those 12-month time frames they cited are for people with no fast jet experience. If the pilots have fast jet experience, 90 days is enough. We've been hearing a lot about when Ukraine will be able to get F-16s operational, and there was talk by the end of the winter, and I was saying, but you got to remember the end of winter is like February time, or in winter, sorry, but that could be up to February rather than next spring, which can go up to May. That's a much longer sort of time frame there. This is really good news. It could happen. Imagine it's the end of February, then from now that's sort of 4.5 months, 5 months away. Now they're saying 3 months. So actually it could be, the new year, just going into new year. But remember, that's just the pilots. And the big thing, I was talking about this yesterday and the day before, I think, the big thing about getting F-16s operational in Ukraine is about the ground crew. It's about preparing the air bases and making sure you've got ground crew that are trained up enough. You can take pilots away from Ukraine because there are more pilots than airframes in Ukraine at the moment, and you can train them up, and it's not going to affect the provision of Ukrainian Air Force, right? Or the activities of the Ukrainian Air Force. However, you start taking ground crew away, I don't know that they've got a surplus of ground crew. So taking ground crew away to go and train them will have an effect on the operations on the ground in Ukraine right now. So it's not so easy. Pilots, I think, are the easiest part of this whole calculus. I don't know. Whether you would see F-16s operational in 90 days or not, I don't know. I can't say, but I doubt it. Trent Telenko is saying here, and based on what Tatarigami is saying, we'll talk about this. In terms of military aid, I'd agree with this. This represents the biggest Ukrainian military aid failure by the Biden administration. You've got to be wary about Trent Telenko. He appears to hate Biden, or hates the Biden administration. He hates Jake Sullivan with a fury, right? So see it within that lens. Numbers matter in a war of attrition. Every National Guard surplus M113 and armoured Humvee should have been sent to Ukraine in the last 18 months. I completely agree. In terms of aid and support, I understand the challenges in supplying Ukraine with artillery rounds and achieving air superiority, says Tatarigami, even with F-16s. However, I'm puzzled by the difficulty in delivering crucial yet available M113s and Humvees, especially considering they're not in service. I've talked to you a lot about this before, about the fact that you give things like M113s, Humvees, that are getting replaced anyway by other vehicles. On presidential drawdown, it costs nothing to give these to Ukraine. They'll put a value on them, but it costs nothing. Just give them to Ukraine. In fact, there was is it here? No, it wasn't here. But there's someone talking about how. Here it is. It is here. Perhaps the upkeep spare parts are not available in mass. These vehicles are notorious for breaking down all the time. That's not true. We're using Humvees since 2015 and have capabilities to maintain. In the worst case scenarios, they can just cannibalize parts, which are difficult to get. M113s are doing just fine. I don't know if it's in this thread or not. Actually, it wasn't that. It was another bit. It was talking about, like I've talked about before, saying like scrap value, and actually, it's difficult to get scrap value for them even because you have to strip out particular things, it's actually a costly endeavor. It's what I talked about in my previous video on this subject. But actually, I think there really is then no excuse, not to give a whole bunch of M113s and Humvees. They've got thousands. The US have thousands of these, and they are effectively obsolete. Okay. Russia has managed to overcome sanctions and export controls imposed by the West to expand its missile production beyond pre-war levels, according to US, European, and Ukrainian officials, leaving Ukraine especially vulnerable to intensified attacks in the coming months, according to New York Times. I'm looking at you, United Arab Emirates. This absolutely infuriates me. Right? We're back to Russia being able to produce what they like in terms of missiles, if this is to be believed. And if they are, where are they getting those components for? Because one of the points of the sanctions, yes, it's to restrict them financially, but it's to stop them building stuff like this. And if they're able to build stuff like this, it means because they're getting those parts from somewhere. China, UAE, and then even European nations providing them with stuff through Kyrgyzstan and whatever. It's absolutely infuriating to think that the Russians can now build more cruise missiles than they were building before the war. Again, don't know if it's true, but I bloody hope it's not. Right, moving on to geopolitical stuff. I better whiz through this. Right, Putin's met with Kim Jong-un in the Vostochny Cosmodrome. The meeting between leaders of the two countries, which are increasingly isolated internationally, is expected to discuss trade in arms and defense technology. I also think human beings, like there's a workforce shortage in Russia for the reasons I've told you many times, and getting in North Korean citizens to do that work in places like the factories that are building missiles, right? It might be something they're interested in. The United States has threatened North Korea with sanctions if it supplies weapons to the Russian Federation. On the other hand, 4 Russian regions face a collapse in budget revenues, says the Moscow Times. That's one of the exiled Russian media organizations. 4 Russian regions in the first half of 2023 faced a double-digit drop in tax revenues into local budgets. The data is provided by experts at the Gaidai Institute in their report on the financial condition of the Russian Federation's regions. The Nenets Autonomous Area has set an anti-record for the reduction of revenues, where the tax collections for 6 months collapsed by 35.1%. Budget revenues of the Caucasia decreased by 27.2%. Kemerovo region, the key region of coal production in the Russian Federation, by 21.7%. St. Petersburg, home to Gazprom's headquarters, lost 13.2% of revenues after gas exports to Europe fell to their lowest level since the mid-1970s. 26 regions of the Russian Federation had debt loads exceeding 50% of their own annual revenues, while Udmurtia was the anti-record holder, with its debt exceeding 100% of its annual budget. At the end of 2023, 35 regions of the Russian Federation had a budget deficit, and 6 were forced to spend almost all the money in their accounts to cover it. This is, in particular, the Republic of Tver, which has nothing left in its reserves, quote, wrote analysts of Expert RA. Kalmykia, Buryatia, Karelia, Murmansk region, and Chukotka Autonomous District also spent almost all of their reserves to cover holes in local budgets. This is potentially pretending to a really big economic crisis for Russia. Interesting, Karelia there. I now know where that's in Russia. It's a World of Tanks place where you can go and fight with tanks. Anyway, good to know. So that is, if it's true, and again, it could be worse than that, because the Russians aren't very good at releasing accurate figures, or it could be better than that, but if that's anywhere near true, Russia are in some serious trouble. Bulgaria wants to end Ukrainian grain import ban. So the way I read this is good for Ukraine. There's this ban on importing Ukrainian grain in certain countries. I'm trying to understand this because this is the EU ban. I thought the EU didn't want to ban it, but it was unilaterally countries of Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland banning the import of Ukrainian grain because it was cheap grain that was leading to a glut, which then meant that revenues for their own farmers would bottom out, and that would affect, their own economy locally. So they didn't want Ukrainian grain to flood through their home markets. So they stopped it, even though they're very much in support, particularly Poland, very much in support of Ukraine in the war. Not so much Hungary, but Poland and to some degree Slovakia, although Slovakia is an interesting place politically at the moment. On the one hand, yeah, we'll support Ukraine, but on the other hand, we don't want to take your grain because it's going to screw our farmers, and we need to look after our farmers. Anyway, Bulgaria no longer supports prolonging the EU ban on Ukrainian grain imports, as 3 major parties in the country's parliament submitted a draft decision against a prolongation, Euroactiv reported on September the 12th. A motion proposed by the governing GERB, SDS and PPDB parties, as well as the opposition party DPS, has been supported by the Parliamentary Economic Committee and must go through the plenary hall. Some movement there. Baltic countries ban entry for Russian-registered vehicles. Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia have banned entry to their respective countries for vehicles registered in Russia after a recommendation by the European Commission. So actually this comes from the European Commission. So according to the European Commission, member states mustn't allow cars with Russian license plates to enter the EU. As of this morning, Russian-registered vehicles can't enter Estonia from Russia. The suffering of Ukrainians continues, so the price of aggression must increase. That's from Kaja Kallas, so the Estonian Prime Minister there. This is quite significant, actually, and it is going to have an effect on Russians themselves. They will realise that they have become a pariah state, and I think that's good news. Right, talking about political sympathies for Russia, I was sort of mentioning Hungary and Slovakia to a degree, but the reason why there is support in Hungary and support in Slovakia for Russia is because of the growth in extreme right-wing political sentiments. The difference in Poland, why Poland has severed its links with Russia much more than those other places, I think might go back to the 2 twins who started the Law and Justice Party, and one of them died in a plane crash that was blamed on Russia. So the other twin who's still kind of in charge, I need to go and research my Polish politics, but the blaming of Russia there means that actually there's this difference between what people in Polish politics think and what other nations think, like Slovakia and Hungary, that would otherwise be very similar to Poland. So the Hungarian political situation, Russia aside, notwithstanding, and the Polish political situation is actually very similar. You've got quite extreme right-wing governments who are trying to shut down all sorts of things like abortion and this and that, and free press freedom, judiciary freedom. So both Poland and Hungary have done really similar things with trying to control the judiciary and the legal system, and they're approaching kind of fascistic ideals, right? Or at least autocratic ideals. They're very, very different in their approaches to Russia. But what's interesting is that Russia there's a growing sympathy for Russia inside Europe, not from the far left, but from the far right. And it seems to be like, you look at Marine Le Pen in France with what used to be the Front National. I forget what they're called now, but she was banked by. She got money from Russian banks, etc., etc. So she's like the far right in France are funded by Russia. You look at Orban in Hungary, funded directly by Russia. You look at Slovakian far right parties that are gaining in prominence and have sympathies to Russia. And here, quite the intervention from the intelligence chief. Austria's longest-serving spy master has warned about the risks of the hard-right Freedom Party coming back to power after next year's elections in Austria, given that it has not severed its ties to Russia. So again, what we are seeing in all the places where the far right are doing well, we are seeing that is entangled within that is a sympathy for Russia and Putin. Possibly because funding is coming from there. There's influence coming from there from people like the Internet Research Agency and Russian trolls, because they know it's really divisive, right? This is a worry. We need to be aware of this. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and Ukrainian President Zelensky are expected to meet at the UN General Assembly gathering next week. That would be the first meeting of the two leaders since the full-scale Russian invasion. There's been a lot of talk recently about how, of all the people that have supported Ukraine quite overtly, there is this, you look at them all and there's a big absence there, and that big absence is Israel. And people have been, discussing why that is the case, and are there Russian sympathies? And I talked about recently how basically Israel are just in it for themselves. I mean, everyone is to a very large degree, and I've talked about that ad infinitum. But Israel, when they are doing things against Iran, they aren't doing it for the benefit of Ukraine. They're doing it for the benefit of themselves, and it might have a collateral knock-on benefit for Ukraine. Well, so be it. So they have been absent from large-scale support for Ukraine, at least in the public and out in the open. They might be trying to do things slyly under the radar in order to, preserve relationships and so on and so forth. This is something that I came across yesterday, and I did a live stream recently with a couple of guys from Bristol with Love for Ukraine, their charity, and they were talking about reaching out to trade unions and whatnot. I came across this. So Michael Harris says, completely overlooked, but so he is CEO of 89 littleatoms.com, free speech, digital rights, freedom, so on and so forth. But he was a Labour councillor as well, so it's a mix of everything there. But the entire mainstream British trade union movement is 100% behind Ukraine. And actually looking into this, you look into this thread, and the latest TUC, so Trade Union Congress, so all the kind of trade unions together, all of the speeches apparently were quite moving and really pro-Ukraine. From all of these different miners and so on and so forth, all these different trade unions. And actually, when you look at the minutes the motion, from the trade union meeting there, the Congress notes, it's absolutely brilliant. This is really, really good. So Congress unequivocally condemns Russia's illegal, aggressive invasion of Ukraine. So to say that all the trade unions basically unequivocally condemn Russia's illegal, aggressive invasion. One, the Congress notes the systematic repression of free trade unions under Putin and Lukashenko, so bring in Belarus as well, and their suppression in the occupied territories of Ukraine since 2014. Appeals from Ukrainian unions for moral and material aid, including the means of Ukrainian self-defense. That those who suffer most in times of war are the working class, and that the labour movement must do all it can to prevent conflict. However, that is not always possible. The TUC's proud history of solidarity with victims of fascist imperialistic aggression, including its support for arms to the Spanish Republic. As trade unionists, we are inherently anti-imperialistic, and our job is to fight imperialism and tyranny at every opportunity. We recognise that a victory for Putin in Ukraine will be a success for reactionary authoritarian politics across the world. This is in direct contrast to that, like the real far-right movements in Europe. And so I think this is really important. The horrendous human and environmental cost of the Ukraine conflict. Millions of people have been forced to abandon their homes and flee, while many others have lost their lives. The Russian program of ethnic cleansing. But trade unions across Ukraine have shown true solidarity and support by offering shelter and food to refugees. ASLEF was working closely with the Ukrainian rail unions, and I reported on that and seen the tremendous work that they have done to support workers in these times of conflict. So the Congress affirms A, its support for civil and labour rights in Russia and Belarus and the immediate release of trade union prisoners. B, its belief that there can be no just or enduring peace while the Russian state continues its denial of Ukrainian sovereignty. Drop mic, brilliant, awesome. C, its solidarity with the Ukrainian people, including refugees whose sanctuary has been delayed or denied by the UK government. D, the reconstruction of Ukraine must have labour and union values at its centre. Congress supports one, the immediate withdrawal of Russian forces from all Ukrainian territories occupied since 2014. Two, Ukrainian unions call for financial and practical aid from the UK to Ukraine. Three, a peaceful end to the conflict that secures the territorial integrity of Ukraine and the support and self-determination of the Ukrainian people. Four, the full restoration of labour rights in Ukraine and the socially just reconstruction and redevelopment programme that embeds collective bargaining and rejects deregulation and privatisation. Five, TUC work, facilitation of affiliates' engagement with the main Ukrainian trade union centres and acknowledge the Ukrainian Solidarity campaign. So it therefore instructs the General Council to, one, send solidarity to all Ukrainian trade unions who are fighting for workers' rights and against imperialism every day. Engage with the Ukrainian trade unions from both trade union centres and a wide range of union members and ideas. Three, stand with Ukrainian people in the UK and support them in whatever means available until they can safely return home. Right. Why I'm spending so much time on this is that this is, if the UK government could come out and say this, or any government could say it so obviously and clearly, we stand with Ukraine until the territory, and the UK government has, so I'm not being harsh on the government, but there's a lot of lack of clarity going on around the world. We'll stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. Here, the TUC have come out and said, yeah, we want peace, but not until you guys get your territory back. And we don't stand for imperialism. We don't stand, like, this is brilliant. It's clear. It's morally steadfast. It's great stuff. And we should see more of this. And this is the working class as well. So it's not about people in big business who might have vested interests in like the industrial military complex. This is like, we want to get the working class. This is about the working people of Ukraine, and they need to have their representation in Ukraine. But it's about us as well, standing with them in solidarity. It's just brilliant. I love it. Good stuff. Right, I talked yesterday, so this is that bit about China I warned you about. So yesterday I talked about lithium mines or lithium reserves being found in America, and a massive load of them. And this might be brilliant for arresting Russian power in hydrocarbons, you know, away from the Western world, basically. And, you know, we might not need to depend so much on Russian oil and gas if we can have a huge amount of lithium to support, you know, batteries and renewable technologies and so on and so forth. And if this is found in America, then that's really, really important. And someone on my thread said, oh my goodness, looking into this, this is well more interesting than you might think. But it turns out that that massive mine in what's it called? It's called the Caldera, the McDermott Caldera, right? Thacker Pass lithium mine. Now, although General Motors is investing $650 million in Nevada lithium mine, right? The largest investment by a car maker in lithium mining. The question is, who owns that mine? And it turns out that the mine is owned predominantly by the Chinese. So when we go back up to here and we say, right, you know, it talks about how big the mine is. The mine is a project of Lithium Nevada LLC, a wholly owned subsidiary of Lithium Americas Corp. You might think, oh, that's good, American corporation, whose largest shareholder is the world's largest lithium mining company, Chinese Ganfeng Lithium. Ah, okay. So one of the things about finding lithium deposits in Norway, I think, but the US as well, is not just about the hydrocarbons issue in Russia, but it's about lithium in China. So China has control of the lithium, which means, again, we get back to the same problem with Russia controlling the hydrocarbons. If China control many of these, you know, elements needed for renewable energies, then you've got the same sort of situation going on there, where you don't have energy independence and you don't have energy security. So this is amazing. Yeah, we found this in the US. All right, who's funding it? Oh, the Chinese. Holy cack. This is. I don't know. You guys, let me know what you think about this. I think this is incredibly important to know about and to understand. And I'm sure it's going to have a huge place in the geopolitical chess game that is evolving. And on the same kind of Chinese front, the Times is on a roll, says Shashank Joshi. So they reported that someone involved in government has just been arrested as a Chinese spy. MI5 secretly warned the Conservative Party that 2 of its potential candidates to become MPs could be spies for the Chinese state. It's a further issue. The security service contacted the party about 2 individuals in 2021 and 2022. This is a couple of years ago. MI5 raised concerns that the individuals had links to the United Front Work Department, a body charged with influencing global policy and opinion. The individuals were blocked from the list, which is used as a pool to pick candidates for by-elections and general elections. So then we have, Canada announced a formal inquiry into foreign influence in Canadian elections. China threatened to take reprisals against Canada for having an inquiry. We worry a lot about Russia, of course, but China are something to consider. Anyway, that's me for today. Let me know what you think. Please like, subscribe, and share. This has been far too long, far too much conversation for me. I do apologize about that. Take care and speak soon.